I don't know why I think the way I do. Um, it's interesting, especially during the worship part of or the singing part of the service. When I hear words, like I want to touch you, I want to see your face, and um, you know, Dave brought out some of the old songs from I know my youth pastor days, but those words strike me as strange. Uh, and I don't know if that's the same for you, but I kind of want to tie it into um, the sermon this morning and talking about the lies people believe in their heads, the lies humans believe in their heads. And maybe that's because when I talk about touching God or touching Jesus, it sounds weird to me. It sounds strange. Even the idea of knowing, we were talking about this idea of knowing God and not just knowing about Him, but knowing Him experientially, um, is just an interesting concept to me. And we'll talk about it a little bit more this morning. But the lies people believe in their heads, the lies you believe in your head, what are they? How many of them are there? I looked up a couple of days ago the greatest conspiracies that humans believe, and there was all kinds of different articles. And one of these articles that I read, it said the single greatest conspiracy of all time is that, and they must get this through polls and different things, but it's that the Apollo landing on the moon is false. So there's just millions of people, and when you get into these conspiracies, and I'll tell you about another one here in a minute, you get into these conspiracies, it's like it's almost as if that's what people are consumed with thinking about. So people who believe, and don't just chastise right away, because I'm sure there's something in your head that somebody in here would go, that's weird. But the conspiracies that people believe, and I'm going to tie this to lies, is ends up being all-consuming to some of these people. But this, one of these is this idea that, hey, the landing on the moon that the United States did is false, and that the government, and you just go into all this information that these people put out, that all the pictures that the government has put out there, all the agencies involved, what would be thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands of people in those agencies, it's all a focused lie towards some end. Okay, that's what they believe. One of them is the government lied in order to win the PR war with the USSR, and that thousands of NASA employees are involved in the cover-up. If any of you have worked in government, nobody can keep a lie, okay? So the fact that just a few people would keep a lie or have a secret of some kind, let alone thousands, is just a false concept. You guys know how, you don't have to raise your hands. There's some government workers in here. I am a government worker, okay? There's no way that people could be in, that many people could be involved in a cover-up. But well, listen to this. It says, this conspiracy, this article says, offers us a brilliant example of how anything can be believed when intellectual waters are muddied and people fail to protect their thoughts and dignity with good thinking. Now, this was not a religious person at all. This is just a secular person writing about it. And he observed that, hey, people can believe anything. Of course, he caveats it when he says when the intellectual waters are muddied, and says when people fail to protect their thoughts. I'm going to argue that people believe anything, regardless of those other items, as far as regardless of what this guy is talking about as far as intellectual waters being muddied or people failing to protect their thoughts. People can believe anything. I'll read you a few other ones. So the idea of the Illuminati, the New World Order, 9/11, that this idea that the government, it was a government designed attack in order to make people believe something, in order to achieve in order to start the war against Islamic extremists. The government actually orchestrated that in order to achieve some means to an end. They believe the same thing about the tragedy at Sandy Hook, the shooting at the elementary school, that it was an orchestrated, planned event by some entity, often the government, in order to achieve gun control or some other thing. It's a manufactured event. Here's the one that kind of opened my eyes to kind of the conspiracy stuff. Ronnie and I, when we've been working out together. Actually, we haven't for about 2 months, but when we were watching some documentaries. And one of these documentaries was a documentary on people that believe in the flat Earth theory. And it was eye-opening. Eye-opening in the sense that there are millions of people who believe it. But it's not just a belief that, hey, the Earth isn't really round and there's maybe valid reasons to believe that. It isn't just that. What is behind it is it's a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy that the government has orchestrated an information war to make you think that the world is round because of various reasons, okay? It says that the evidence has been faked, it's suppressed by multiple government agencies, even that GPS devices are rigged to make aircraft pilots wrongly believe they're flying around a globe. I mean, that's just a couple of the things that they come up with reasons as far as why they believe what they believe. One of the most popular conspiracy theories, and Caleb, you can help me with this one, is that people believe in aliens, that they're not just out there somewhere, but they actually populate the earth, and that they're lizard people. Yeah, you can help me. Thank you. I was thinking about doing almost like a Sunday school type sermon here where we have open discussion. But yeah, apparently aliens are living amongst us, and they are some kind of lizard people that basically shape form, shape shift. It says nearly 12 million people believe that an elite class of space-traveling lizards rule the earth. Among these lizards is Justin Bieber. I don't know. Yeah, it's true, Laura. Sorry. Justin Bieber is a lizard who was reported earlier this year to shapeshift mid-concert into a giant reptile with big scaly claws and a black stripe down the middle of his back. That's what happens when you legalize certain forms of what was once illegal also, when people... But listen to what else this guy said in his article. He says, over and over again, I have found that the people involved in conspiracy communities weren't necessarily some mysterious other. This guy went on a cruise. It was like a cruise with a bunch of conspiracy folks that believed all kinds of stuff, all right? And so he was actually visiting with these people and trying to understand, hey, who are these people? What are these conspiracy theories? And, try to understand them. And he said, hey, they weren't just these weird other people out there. He says, we're all prone to believing half-truths, forming connections where there are none to be found, or finding importance in political and social events that may not have much significance at all. So this idea that we're all susceptible to this dynamic of being a human, that we believe half-truths, which I say we believe lies. We make connections about things and people that aren't reality. They're not true. When I'm talking to people in the counseling room, we're talking all the time about trying to clarify, well, when somebody makes a statement of fact about somebody or something in a relationship, I'm trying to clarify, so how did you get to that conclusion? How do you know that somebody thinks that about you? And most often it's something that's built in the mind of that human. It's not something that they actually experienced or heard the other person say. It's just hey, we learned how to connect dots on paper with those cool little things as elementary school kids. And yet that's what we do in our brains. In lack of information, I'm telling people all the time, in lieu of or lack of information, real information, we create it. We make it up. So he says that we're all prone to believing this stuff. And he gives some other reasons. But then he gives a definition of a conspiracy theory. He says, It is a belief. Now, I'm going to ask you to kind of relate this to God, but it is a belief that a small group of people are working in secret against the common good to create harm, to affect some negative change in society, to seize power for themselves, or to hide some deadly or consequential secret. Well, doesn't that sound familiar? You want me to read it again? It is a belief that a small group of people or a person are or is working in secret against the common good, you could say against your common good, to create harm, to affect some negative change, and I'll just leave it at this, to seize power for themselves. It's the exact same thing that happened with Adam and Eve in the garden. They believed in their head some half-truths or lies about God that weren't true. I wrote a little statement here kind of in my outline. It said, the problem with people and how different God is from us. Believing lies has always been, at first I wrote part of the problem with people, but I'm going to say is the problem of people. It's believing lies. And all lies we believe stem from the lies that we believe about God. I'll say that again. All the lies that you believe and I believe, all the things that I create in my head that aren't true, I believe stem from the lies that I believe about God. I hope to show you this morning. You can turn to Romans with me, and I'm going to try to resist explaining or going into detail much in this Romans 1 passage. We've talked about it a lot here at our church, but I'm using it just to set up something that I really want to emphasize in chapter 3. So in Romans 1, Paul, I believe, explains this really succinctly about this idea of the lies that humans believe about God, and then how everything really flows from that. So Romans chapter 1, verse 18 says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth." And what he's about to show is that truth isn't just like information, like things that are true out there. No, that truth is specifically the truth about God and who he is. And he goes right into that. He says, "For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power, his divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world, in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him." Now, he's talking about all people. All right, but if it helps you, think about Adam and Eve when they were with God in the garden, okay? So they were there in the beginning, in this relationship with God, and through creation and the relationship that they had with God, it was clearly evident who God was and what he was about. So, but he says right here, "For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God, nor did they give thanks to him." And then what you see here is just the residual effect of that. And the residual effect is not, okay, God says, okay, bad on you guys, then this is what I'm going to cause because of that as punishment. It's just the residual effect of me believing lies about God, of Adam and Eve believing lies about God, of you believing lies about God. He says, but they became, and they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. 22, claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. We should put in creepy things. Therefore, and this is the first time that he says this. He says this 3 different times. He says, therefore God gave them up. He says he gave them up in the lusts of their heart. If that word is distracting to you, just replace it with desires. He gave them up in the desires of their heart, to impurity, to dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. And I'll read to the end of, that is where I was going to end right there with 25. He says two more times, it's 26 through 28. He says, "For this reason God gave them up to dishonorable passions, for their women exchanging natural relations for those that are contrary to nature. And the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another. Men committing shameless acts with men, receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done." And he just continues to go on. So what he says here is people, Adam and Eve, and everybody after Adam and Eve, decided to believe lies about God. And as a result of that, God let them live in that belief. And he just gave them up to that thinking. So that what people did was just all kinds of stuff. All kinds of stuff that I don't even need to explain. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie. And that whole idea there is how I'm thinking about God, how I'm perceiving Him, what I attribute to Him. So if you can try to set aside kind of the big, kind of normal, crazy, sinful stuff, the sexual impurity and all that stuff that is true, but I think can often get so distracting when we're talking about this. It can get distracting because most of you in here can say, "Oh yeah, that's not me," okay? But what God explains here, what Paul explains here, is that that's a big example of just what people do with this foolishness and darkened heart, okay? But it has everything to do with the fact that I've exchanged the truth about God for a lie. And God just says, "Hey, you know what? I'm going to allow you to live in that." And he gives us over. And God gave them over. Jeff, last week in his sermon, just briefly talked about us creating a caricature of God. So what every person does, what you and I, even what part of our problem is now, we talked about knowing God and knowing Him more out of Philippians chapter 3. What God is doing over the course of our life is He's teaching us about Him. And He's changing our thinking. But that is because we have created a caricature. We've created an idea of God that is pleasing to me. We create an image of God that is pleasing to us. We think, worship, and pray to a God that is how and who we want Him to be rather than who He really is. See, the God that we have created in our head has everything to do with what we think we're living for or what we believe we're hoping for. It's interesting. I thought of the verse when I was reading this of Judges chapter 21, verse 25. It says, "In those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes." That's this concept of God giving us over. He lets you do what's right in your eyes. And that's based on what you believe about God. So God lets people function out of what they individually believe what is right and good for them. And that's in a vacuum, regardless of what they really need. And that's the difference here. We keep on talking about, God has created us as creatures in need of Him, in need of His assistance. It's a relationship that is established with a particular, I don't know how to explain that other than we believe we don't need help, or we believe that we need help, but only as defined by me. So God lets people function out of what they believe is right and good for them. And that is regardless of what they think they need. What's interesting is God says everyone did what was right in His own eyes, and then Proverbs 14:12 says there is a way that seems right to man, but its end is the way of death. See, often people talk about, especially in the religious context, that God created death really as kind of a form of punishment, kind of like in this legalistic or moralistic point of view, whereas death is just a natural consequence of man going his own way. It's a result. We've separated ourselves from life, which automatically results in death. God lets people decide what they want to believe based on what they think is right and good. And what happens in this, and listen to this, God lets each individual person become a judge with the ability to armchair quarterback God himself. So I hope you guys can recognize that. You all are little judges and judgeettes. Right, kids? Thank you, Johnny, for the thumbs up. You all see the world or perceive the world with what you think is a clear set of lenses. That's why you can look at a person or a relationship or a situation and you can establish an opinion about it because you think you see it clearly. You're a judge. And you and I condemn, but yet we condemn sounds like mean and bad, doesn't it? You meanies. Is there another way I could say that takes the edge off? I mean, yeah, you and I condemn, but you and I make judgments about things and people that we think are right. It's condemnation, but it's okay in my head. When I see my kids act the way they act towards each other, I make a judgment about it, and I have emotions about it because I think I'm right. So God lets you all be judges in your individual worlds. But guess what you're the real judge over? Or guess who you judge a lot? I'm saying a lot because I don't know if you'll agree with me if I say, guess who you judge the most? It's God. It's God and what you think about Him in relation to what you're experiencing in life. God lets each individual person become a judge with the ability to armchair quarterback God Himself. So I want to show you Romans chapter 3. Oh man, I always take way too long on the first page and a half. Romans chapter 3, verse 4. It seems like just like a little side verse in there, okay? But I hope I can show you what made me excited about it. So Paul is talking about the reality of human existence. He talks about how we believe lies about God and how everything flows now. Our activity, our action, and what we do flows from this dynamic that, hey, we believe lies about God. We exchange the truth of God for a lie, and therefore He gives us over to our desires and what we think is right and wrong. He continues to explain that. He begins to show the people that he's writing to that we turned the law of God or God's words into the same thing. That we think that we have righteousness because of what we do and how I see rightness versus God and who He is and what flows from Him. And he's talking about that dynamic. And then he says in verse 4, by no means, he says, I'll read the first part just so it kind of makes sense. Then what advantage has the Jew, or what is the value of circumcision? Much in every way. To begin with, the Jews were entrusted with the oracles of God. What if some were unfaithful? Does their faithfulness nullify the faithfulness of God? Because he's talking about the faithfulness of God in light of the sinfulness of man. And he says, by no means. And he says, let God be true, though everyone were a liar, as it is written, that you may be justified in your words and prevail when you are judged. So listen to this. Listen to just a brief explanation. So most of your translations say that right there. It says, let God be true and every human being a liar, as it is written, so that you may be proved right when you speak and prevail when you judge. So the normal human picture, the normal way for me to understand this, just right off the bat, the way I just read it, is that the idea here is of one proving themselves to another. Again, kind of in a law sense or in an argument sense. I'm right, you're wrong. Kind of in a courtroom sense. That God is going to prove himself right even if you don't agree. Because what Paul says there in the second part of the verse, that you may be justified in your words, he's talking about God, not a person. And I'll tell you that, I'll show you why here in a minute. He's quoting Psalm chapter 51, verse 4. So he says that this one translation says that you, God, may be justified in your words and prevail when you are judged. This one says, and prevail when you judge. So it's this idea of kind of a courtroom sense that, hey, God is going to prove himself right. That, hey, all you humans out there are liars, and God's going to prove himself. Even if you don't agree with it, you're going to be proven wrong. That's one way of looking at it. The scripture that Paul is referring to is Psalm 51:4. That's when David was confronted about his sin with Bathsheba. And David is talking in reference to God. David is asking God for mercy. He's asking for forgiveness. He's admitting that he sinned. And kind of strangely, he's saying, hey, God, I've sinned against you alone, even though there's residual effects to humans and all kinds of other people. He's saying, God, I've sinned against you alone, that he did what's evil in God's sight. And what I believe was going on there is David was believing lies about God. He acted as judge and jury in that situation. And he understood it. So David is saying, therefore, God is innocent. And God speaks the truth about David. And God overcomes and prevails even when he is judged by David. There's a couple other ways to listen to that verse. It says, but God is true and every man a liar, as it is written, that you, God, may be justified or rendered innocent in your words, and you will overcome or prevail when you are judged. You guys catch? It's just a subtle change. The other one says, hey, God, you're going to be true when you speak and when you judge. This one says, God, you know what? You are innocent when you speak. What you said about me is true. This is when David was talking about his sin with Bathsheba. And now he's admitting, hey, God, you are innocent in the words that you said. And even though I judged you, you prevailed. I mean, crazily, he prevailed in convicting David of his sin and enacting forgiveness in light of what David did. So this idea of us judging God, let me read you some verses from Job to try to really slam this home. So this is Job. You guys remember the story of Job, right? A lot of people, when you ask, hey, have you heard about the story of Job? They think it's this sick contest between God and Satan, that Job is acted upon by Satan. His family's taken away. His kids are they die, and all kinds of bad stuff happens to Job. But listen to Job's words and think about it in terms of his humanness and how he is putting himself up as a judge against God himself. He says, does it please you? He's talking to God, okay? Does it please you to oppress me? To reject the work of your hands and favor the schemes of the wicked? He says later on in chapter 10, though you know, God, that I'm not guilty and there is no deliverance from your hand. He says, behold, now I have prepared my case. I know that I will be vindicated. So he's seeing this idea that, hey, I got to prove to myself, I'm going to prove to myself that I'm right and God is wrong. He says, God has delivered me to unjust men. He has thrown me to the clutches of the wicked. In Job 19, he says, then understand that it is God who has wronged me and drawn his net around me. He says again, as surely as God lives, it's interesting that he says, as surely as God lives, who has deprived me of justice, the Almighty who has embittered my soul. And one more, listen to this. I will hold fast my righteousness and never let it go. That's Job. Again, if you're distracted by the righteousness word, you can say, I will hold fast to my rightness. I will hold fast to the way I see things, how it should have taken place, how it didn't, and I'm going to hold fast to the fact that I am right. my rightness. And he says, I will never let it go. Listen, as long as I live, my conscience will not accuse me. Okay, you want to talk about a human believing lies in his head? That's what he's talking about regarding God. God interrupts him and he says this, would you really annul my justice? Would you condemn me to justify yourself? This is the same verse. I'm just reading it in a bunch of different translations. Would you declare me guilty to justify yourself? He says, well, I'll give you one more. It says, are you trying to prove that I am unjust, to put me in the wrong and yourself in the right? This is just a vivid example of the lie that we create about God in our head. It sounds weird to say I hope that some of you, based on the life experiences that you've had, from the losses to the tragedies to the whatever, this can resonate or connect with the thoughts that you've had of God at some time. And I'm not saying that as a judgment or condemnation, but just to recognize the natural thinking that we have regarding God. Whether it's not fair or this shouldn't happen or... So what's the point? That point of Romans chapter 3, I believe, is God is striving to show who he is in order to fully persuade us of his goodness. See, the crux of this exchanging the truth for a lie is this right here. We don't believe that what God has for us is for our benefit and our good. God isn't proving his case in order to put us in our place. He continues to be with us in our ignorance, in our darkness, in our foolishness as we believe lies about him to convince us, like David and Job, that he is indeed good and full of mercy. Very different ways of thinking about God. Is God just going to prove his point to me one day? Or is God actually striving with me in order to show me and prove to me that he really is good? And that what he has for me in this life is actually evidence of his mercy and his grace. See, if you can think of God like that, despite your circumstance and my circumstance, then the verses that we all think we believe really add a different emphasis or a fuller meaning, like Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and to not harm you, to give you a future and a hope. Psalm 40, verse 5, it says, many, O Lord, my God, are the wonders you have done, and the plans you have for us, none can compare to you. Psalm 92:4, for you, O Lord, have made me glad by your deeds. I will sing for the joy at the work of your hands. And I normally don't want to leave you with a verse that might create more questions than answered, but I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that for you this morning. Romans chapter 11, verse 32. For God has consigned all men, or kind of hedged them in. It says to disobedience. This has to do with the fact that, hey, we've separated from him. We have disobeyed. We have come out from him, and now he's allowed us to go our own way. And there he has us. And it says, so that he may have mercy on them all. The crazy, vivid picture of Scripture now shows us that Jesus, the person and work of Jesus, he endured the judgment of his creatures, wrongly condemned in a kangaroo court, as a result of lies being believed by people. And those lies had to do with that little definition of the conspiracy. That Jesus was somehow against the common good. That he was there to create harm for some reason. That he was there to seize power for himself, just like all other humans, by the way. See the caricature that was created regarding Jesus himself? He's no different than me, because guess what I want to do? I want to seize power. I want to have control. And I look at everybody else with suspect lens, believing lies in my head. Ironically, Jesus was there to save the very ones who set themselves up as judges. And now all through the New Testament, God points to Jesus and says, there is the example of my love. There is the example of how different I am than you. And no, I'm not just going to put you in a courtroom one day and prove my point, that you guys can feel bad and sit there and go, okay, yeah, I guess I was wrong. No, instead, he is striving with us to prove himself out in that he really is good. He really is merciful. He really is loving. And he is here, and the way he's acting in your life is for your benefit and his glory. Let me pray. Dear Lord God, I thank you for your love. I thank you for your grace. I thank you that you strive for us, Lord, and that the reason that you keep us alive now is to teach us about yourself, and not just merely through information, but by experience. But Lord, you really do show us that there is no condemnation anymore for those who are found by you, for those who are in you, for those whom you find. Lord, I pray that you would convince us of this truth, and that it would create joy and peace and comfort in our hearts. We thank you for your love. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.